Hello, Patreon. Thank you for being here. I want to make sure to welcome everyone who's new to Patreon this month. I know there's a lot of you since The New Yorker published their 10 best podcasts of 2018 and included Cocaine Rhinestones on there. I want to thank you for supporting the work that I'm doing. It's really important to me. It means a lot that you want to help me do it. Just so you know, when you sign up for this, it unlocks all the previous posts that I've made also. So if you're eligible to see this video, that means you can see all of the videos that I've made. Anyone who's eligible for anything else, you can see all the past iterations of that content. So feel free to scroll back through and see what I've already posted on here. I always try to be forthcoming about how the show gets made, where I'm at in the process, any other information I think you might find interesting. Right now, I've got just one more person really to research at the Hall of Fame and the archives there, and then I can start moving all my notes around for the season. Make sure I'm heading into the writing phase with a solid outline, all that stuff. There was one thing I shared on social media that I realized in the first season, the Winona Judd episode was the longest episode, so that had the longest script. And my notes, I've got a file and there were 4,000 words in that note file. And the file that I have for who's going to be the primary character in season 2 is 24,000 words. I hope this gives everyone some idea of what I mean when I say that things are more complicated this time around. As I said before, the research part, the taking notes, is probably the most important part of making a show. Everything that happens after that happens from that. It's actually kind of strange to know how close I am to being done with it. Last month, I forgot to tell you about my appearance on an episode of a podcast called Reframe. I think it might be best described as an entrepreneurial themed podcast. So it's mostly focused on the various ways I've managed to make a living and my background before launching any of the podcasts, all that stuff. More recently, I took a trip out to comedian Dusty Slay's house to record an episode of his show, which is called Having a Good Time with Dusty Slay. Most of that conversation was about my life as a touring musician, stories of being on the road. Dusty is a road dog himself, so we mostly just talked about that. Apparently, he had some technical difficulties with the microphones not being turned all the way on or something, so the sound's not the best, but you can still hear the conversation. And lastly, there's a podcast called Documenteers. They watch documentaries and then talk about them. They asked me to be on that show, told me we could do any documentary I wanted to do. So I chose this Orson Welles film called F for Fake. Sort of not even really a documentary, but it's been a pretty huge thing in my life. I had a lot of fun talking about that. All these podcasts are made in Nashville. Some time ago, I posted all over my social media that if anyone makes a show here, I would be on it. I had a lot of reasons for posting that. It's important to me, so I'm going to keep doing that. You'll keep seeing me be on these shows. All right, that's it for updates. I want to talk a little bit more now about how I choose subjects for episodes. People ask me about this a lot, and I know several of you are starting your own shows, so you're probably going to start thinking about this. The honest answer is that I don't think about it very much at all. It all sort of falls into place in a way that makes sense to me. I talked about it a little bit in the Q&A episode, how I came up with the first 3 episode subjects, and it sort of just went from there. The songwriter polls are a good example of how this works. It's sort of like a choose your own adventure book. I'm constantly polling to make these decisions. And I also have the luxury of knowing how the story is going to end and what the next story is going to be. So what I'm thinking about more is if this story can be used to learn something more about what we already know, or learn something that we're going to need to know for what's coming later. That really is how the decision gets made, more so than me choosing my favorite singer or a song I want to talk about. That's really not that much of it. Obviously, there's a little bit of that, but it's more about understanding the story as a whole and entertainment. I'm not really trying to pick apart the first season to show specific examples, but some of the recurring themes are like country music in the state of California, the popularity of it there, the Okie migration, Western swing. If you look at the first season, you're looking at the answers that were obvious to me because that's how I made the show. For instance, if I know I'm going to talk about Buck Owens, which I know I'm going to talk about because Hee Haw is what almost everyone thinks country music is, then I know I'm going to talk about Spade Cooley, Bobby Gentry, Okie from Muskogee, and Ralph Mooney. I know that from Buck Owens. And if you go back and look at the connection between all those things, then that's why. That goes for all the sidebar conversations, all the intros on the show. It's either because I know what's coming next or I know what it means about what I've already said. Like I said, it's complicated, but people are always asking how I choose to do an episode on a Merle Haggard song instead of like a Charlie Pride song or something. And that's why. It's just what makes sense to me at the time. And I'm usually starting from the last thing you're going to hear and working my way towards the first thing that you hear. So maybe looking at it backwards kind of helps. All right, that is it for this month. I'll be back next month. We'll do the next round of polls.